Bon, Mesdames, Messieurs, chère Madame la Présidente Catherine Vautrin, cher Monsieur le Président Gilles Bayat, cher Monsieur, où est-il, le directeur François Moncebo. Il nous manque maintenant, mais ça ne fait rien, chers collègues. Je vous souhaite un bienvenue de ma part. Je viens de l'ARL. C'est un réseau des scientifiques et des personnes de la pratique qui s'en occupent de l'aménagement du territoire depuis 1946 et qui se trouve avec le centre, disons, de l'organisation à Hanovre, en Allemagne. Je suis fière de me trouver parmi les invités des 5e Rencontres internationales de Reims. Mais, chers Mesdames, Messieurs, veuillez avoir de la compréhension que je change maintenant la langue pour vous donner ma présentation. Si je pourrais l'ouvrir maintenant. So, ladies and gentlemen, I was very enthusiastic about the presentation we just had par Pierre Donadieu because I think it will be connected to my presentation quite in some parts at least. So, celui-là. Regardons-nous si ça marche. N'inquiétez pas, ça semble trop, mais il y a beaucoup des images. Okay, here we are. Present and past of urban agriculture, respectively gardening in Germany. In a nutshell, it's time to harvest nuts. It's autumn time, so I try to put it in a nutshell. Let's start with the content. It is not an order of mentioning the different aspects, but just a kind of tree or leaf. I will start with some definitions, and I will come to different terms to make clear about what we are discussing in Germany, and probably to differentiate a bit between these aspects, because I was quite aware for years now that if we talk on that scientific base about one issue in different languages, then we always match the problem of understanding each other, although we talk the same language. But we have another connotation in mind, talking about agriculture or gardening or whatsoever. So it doesn't mean the same probably in the discussions in Germany and in France or elsewhere. So I'm just talking about the discussion in Germany, and that means in Germany there is no legal definition about urban agriculture, urban farming or urban gardening, but there is one about allotment gardens. So when I talk about urban agriculture in the discussion, in the German discussion about urban agriculture and farming, and we really use the English terms as well, we talk about an action instead of surface definition. So we are not talking about very special places on Earth, but mainly about the action of doing agriculture or farming somewhere in our space. The definition I could find in our discussion is a way of inner urban land use to produce fruits, vegetables, herbs, and even animal products. It's a micro to small scale, individual motivated, executed by people without specific formation in agriculture. With short retail chains, self-sufficient or donors of product or direct marketing, and that refers a bit to what Pierre Donadieu said about the droit d'usage et droit de revenu. So there's a direct match which could be discussed later on. It happens mainly in allotment gardens, private house gardens, on balconies even, or in kind of community gardens, which were mentioned and shown with some very interesting pictures by Pierre also. It should be differentiated from peri-urban agriculture, which was shown by Christopher and Antonia in the first presentation, which has more an economic and income generating means on the basis of bigger surfaces, and more knowledge. So the definitions about agriculture are rural agriculture, which is, I would say, the normal agriculture we all know of our countries. Agriculture which goes into the settled areas, but of course, these are surfaces bound to agriculture, and they are probably much in risk to be urbanized in the near future. And there's that kind of urban agriculture I'm going to talk about more, and that is a bit related to a new feeling probably in the people's mind with the mention of we can plant another world. So there's a whole social movement probably behind it. If we look at urban gardening, again, we talk about an action instead of surfaces definition. It has to do with common leisure and productive land use, a bit with reference to the US community gardens, probably. A high commitment of citizens is behind there, individuals and groups. And it very often happens on inner urban brown fields for self-sufficient production. Then, of course, there are that kind of neighborhood gardens, and we call them in German Gemeinschaftsgärten. Again, probably could be translated with community gardens, but I'm not sure about that. They are commonly developed and created. These are green spaces, parks, and gardens, but they are for public use also. And there's that kind of guerrilla gardening, again in action, more a form of acting than a special place, tolerated, informal, or even illegal in some places. It has to do with planting of decorative or sometimes productive plants, and it happens everywhere in a way where some earth is available along streets and parks, on city places, and on brown fields. So this is an action picture taken in Berlin, an action of mainly young people having a whole lot of plants to be planted somewhere in their quarter where they live. So Bergas and others, they tried to bring some order into these very different aspects of urban agriculture, gardening, etc. So they detected many different forms of urban gardening with different motivations, and that is why it is difficult to find one suitable definition. They differentiated the retail level, the interests behind that kind of activity, and the different actors. And I couldn't really translate everything on this chart, but as you... I just looked to find the mouse. We didn't adapt. It's here. So the retail level is from the micro to the macro level. And as we use those foreign terminology or taken from foreign, especially Latin wording, where's the mouse again? Okay. you see that there are some socio-cultural aspects to be differentiated from subsistence and commercial interest. And you have these individuals and private households, you have associations and startups and enterprises. And enterprises could be seen as farmers as well. So if we now look at these different types, there is an ideal type, and on the level of subsistence in the second column, these are house gardens, balcony planting, and that is, of course, a subsistent issue. If we look at the socio-cultural aspects, these are, for instance, gardens on the surfaces of school buildings, school areas, which was very common when I was a child. It then declined totally, but now it comes again that teachers of biology mainly, they take the children out to the garden to make them aware of what nature means and what does it mean to produce nutrition. And of course, there are the commercial in the next column. So there are the subtypes and the mixed types, subsistence, sociocultural, and commercial. And there are some examples given here. I don't want to be too detailed on this chart. Some examples in Berlin, in the UK, and also in the US, in Philadelphia, Germantown Kitchen. Coming to the differentiation of urban agriculture and urban gardening, and by the way, could someone probably attach the mouse? It seems to be easier that I could show you something while I'm talking. I would like to have some technician here to attach the mouse, if possible. So the urban agriculture seems to be more professionally organized, and the urban gardening seems to be more that community of citizens, specialized versus subsistence-oriented. The one could be already a bit more market-oriented. The other one is more that life quality issue. And the urban agriculture, compared to the, let me say, normal agriculture, is much closer to the consumer, a director marketing, which, with regard to sustainability, is, in my eyes at least, a very interesting aspect due to the fact that you reduce mobility of goods. The urban gardening is very locally bounded and neighborhood driven. So the different aspects are, on one hand, ecologically and aesthetically qualities, but as well pedagogical and social dimensions. And that could probably, although I didn't found it in the source of Lorberg and Timper, I couldn't found it in their saying about urban gardening. But I personally would add it as well, the pedagogical and social dimension. He gives some project examples in Cologne, in Mechtenberg, and the very famous, on the right column, the very famous Prinzessinnengärten in Berlin. You may have seen them also already. And he gives an example of Lyon as well. I haven't been to Îlot des Amarantes in Lyon, so I couldn't really estimate whether they belong to these examples or not. Another differentiation was given by Kemper, and she says that urban agriculture is more done by farmers on huge areas with high spatial impacts. It is a very professional acting, market-oriented, and with normally low media presence. Low media presence, except the farmers harm the environment, then of course they normally have a huge presence in the media. The urban gardening is done by urban citizens in different groupings on small areas, low spatial impacts, non-professional, mainly socio-culturally oriented, and with a high media presence, at least today. Here is one example of urban agriculture and gardening in the so-called Amsha Park. You might know it, the most known city of those are shown here. If you haven't been there at all, maybe the city of Duisburg, you see here, down here. So that is the so-called Rhine-Ruhr area in Germany, which is in the west, in North Rhine-Westphalia. And this Amsha Landschaftspark is probably comparable to what Pierre Donadieu presented us for some of the plans being elaborated in France also. So this is just the aspect of agriculture and leisure landscapes we see here. And this is a very bad chart. I do apologize for it. I just tried to scan it out of an article which was written by Denise Kemper about urban agriculture in that Amsha Park I just showed you. And that is kind of an actor diagram. So in the whole Amsha Park, there are much actors who are integrated in the development of the Amsha Park. Sébastien, est-ce que tu peux attacher le souris ici? Sébastien, est-ce que tu pourrais attacher le souris? Ah, oui, merci. So you have the official actors here, the red ones like the Ministry of Environment. Oui, ça marche. Ah, très bien, c'est meilleur. Je m'excuse. You have the official ones here, like the Ministry of Environment or the Ministry of Housing. There are scientific elements inside. There are scientific network, universities, and other research institutes. There are associations of agriculture or Chamber of Agriculture of North Rhine-Westphalia. There are more than 380 farmers, and so on and so forth, initiatives of individuals, etc. So they merge all in that development of the Amsha Park. And here is one example, a quite recent example of
taking into account, you know, the little delay before you begin. You still have 10 minutes left.
Yeah,
so
I think there are not many things left. So this is an example of one of our newspapers. Transition Town might be known by the audience, and there's one group of Transition Town doing some planning for a park area and the enlargement of a park area in Hanover. And these are just some locations of different urban gardens, urban gardening in Germany, indicating with the numbers how much you can find. And for instance, in Berlin, you have more than 68 urban gardening projects already. Again, some locations within Germany. And these are only the gardens established within 2 years in 2010 and 11 within Germany. So you have to add them to the other ones already existing. The allotment gardens are a very good basis in Germany for this movement of gardening, because they started already in the mid-19th century to be established. They were initiated for the poor people to grow their own food. So it was, in a way, the same objective as we have today, for instance, in that example of Lisbon, which was shown already. And there was one person which is related to that idea of allotment gardens, which was a medical doctor, Mr. Schreber, who lived in Leipzig, who wanted to improve the life quality of children by giving them a playground and good food on the other hand. Today there are 1.2 million allotment gardens in Germany, about 50,000 hectares all in all. They are located with easy access and close to housing complexes. And they are so well known that even a famous Australian historian who is detecting Germany and its characteristics moved to those allotment gardens, which are obviously very typical for Germany, and showed it on a TV channel recently. So this is a very old picture already, dating back to 1920, which is one allotment garden or one area of allotment gardens in the city of Leipzig. And you see here a bit that kind of time span when the allotment gardens were established in 1833 up to now, where we have 1 million allotment gardens, or more than 1 million already. They were 1 million in the year 2000 approximately. They are based on the so-called Bundeskleingartengesetz, so we have that regulation, and they should have a size of maximum 400 square meter, and 1/3 has to be used to grow food for personal use. This is changing during the last 2 decades, I would say. And they challenge nowadays a lot of vacancies. They challenge changes with regard to the migrants, who are very fond of these allotment gardens because they are very often familiar to have a garden plot and to grow their own vegetables. And they are somehow in competition to what we are calling today the urban gardens or urban gardening. I will skip this. It's a very... Just to give you that example of the inhabitants, number of allotment gardens, and the inhabitants per allotment garden. If there are concepts of the city council in Hanover, which is marked in yellow, yes, we have a concept of allotment gardens in the city, and the importance is very high. So during the last years we had lots of manifestations due to the fact that the University for Veterinary Aspects wanted to broaden their area, and they did it on allotment garden surfaces, and that urged a very, very huge discussion in the whole of the population. So reasons for vacancies in these allotment gardens are mainly, and I just point out the highest number, the age of the users, because allotment gardens tend to be for old people. But already there's a certain renewal, and young families especially step into the allotment gardens. And the reaction on the vacancies is very different. Sometimes, or most of them, are maintained by other members of that special area. Some are let to low-income groups. Some are transferred to common grounds within one area. They plant fruit trees, for instance. Several are unused. They have no maintenance, which does not make the whole area very sympathetic. Some give them to other members on a low rent. Some are transferred to parking places, which is not really the mean of allotment gardens. And some are used by schools or kindergartens, and some other reasons, of course. So just a map of Hanover, and you see these greenish spots all around a bit. And what is remarkable is that many of these allotment gardens are along the railway areas, because they very often leave some surfaces behind which couldn't really be used by housing. So they are very often, if you come to any German city and you are aware of looking outside the window while you are approaching the city, you will see allotment gardens everywhere. And these are, the red dots are new developments of urban gardens right now, which are established since the 90s in Germany, and we already have 250. They are addressing more these social issues, ecological ideas of organic and alternative gardening. What is new? Is there really anything new about urban gardening? Probably it is really that matter of we plant a new world. There are no regulations. I would like to point on this. No real regulations, no frameworks which exist on the level of allotment gardens. And very often there is no structure, organizational structure, like we have the formalized structure in a form of associations for the allotment gardens. There is one citation over here, and someone was interviewed saying that already in the 60s and 70s there were some urban gardening actions in Berlin, but at that time the services of green of parks and green spaces of the town, they had a very restrictive and opposing behavior against the people who wanted to make the city a bit more green. So it took quite some decades until the city started to be even fond of these actions and integrating it into their own planning. I don't want to go into the details now. So this is an example of the so-called Princess Gardens in Berlin. You can see on the upper side left the area where nothing happened for, I think, more than a decade. On the right-hand side, the small image is the Prinzessin Garden after its refurbishment and planting. And on the huge picture in the middle, you see that there are very different plants and even a very ancient structure in a way like we can see it in the Park of Versailles. So it is very organized. And this is the disputed, the disputed area, Tempelhofer Feld, which was the former airport of Berlin, dating back to the 30s of the last century, and should have been transformed to urban area, but people were manifesting for months and months and months, and they just took over. They took over the whole area, and at the end, they really made use of it totally, and there was kind of voting whether this area should be transferred to urban areas or not, and the people voted against urbanization. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you, Evelyn.